My name is John Neas, and this is a 1956 SR Corvette. Corvette, or Chevrolet, was trying to save the Corvette. In 1955, they only sold 700, and they redesigned it for 56, but decided to make a performance car out of it. And as part of the effort, they decided to run cars at Sebring against international competition. They had 4 cars that were actually team cars of Chevrolet, but they put them in other people's names, so if they did really bad, they might not be embarrassed. Also, who knows what their attorneys might have said at that time. And they also had another one that ran.
We're talking about the SR1 or?
Well, I'm going to the SR1.
I'm sorry. Okay, got it.
Why they built this. And there was another one that had been an in-house car, but came kind of in semi-private hands that ran also, so a total of 5 cars. FIA, to legalize these cars for Sebring, wanted to see a number of production cars built. At the time of Sebring, Chevrolet agreed to build 6 at their factory at St. Louis, and they used 11 of the 13 special racing or SR options. This car was one of those 6 produced, and some of the items it had was Houdaille shocks, special suspension, special shocks, limited slip differential, shortened steering column, dual fan belts on the motor, and just a series of things. One of the options they did not have, of the original options, they did not have the 37-gallon gas tank. They produced these cars in early June of 1956 at St. Louis. Some of the options included also were the Hallebrand magnesium knockoff wheels, and had side scoops to cool the rear brakes. The backing plates were vented, had Cero metallic brake shoes, oversized, had side exit exhaust with slightly larger tubing and a very short muffler. 4 of the cars went to one of their dealers that had good connections and raced, Dick Doan in Dundee, Illinois. A connected dealer out of Dwayne Grotwald acquired one of them, and when he picked it up, it had SR on the chassis. He was wanting to send me a picture of that, but it got lost during an IRS audit. He also gave me the canceled check for buying this car from Dick Doan, and the gentleman is now in his 90s, and what I understand is still having a good time. This car went to a local person, probably in the South Dakota, Northwest Iowa area. He wanted a red one, so he painted it red. I think it's probably a Cadillac red. So it spent a high part of its life as a red car, even though it was Aztec copper from the factory. The second owner made probably the most significant history with the car. His name is Bruce Geisler, out of the LA area, and a confirmed car hobbyist from day one. And the family had enough income that he could do it. He picked his car up. He even gave me some 3D pictures of it throwing up snow in South Dakota as they left that area. Took it to LA, and he proceeded to enjoy it for part of what it was built for. It wasn't road racing, but it was drag racing and top end racing. He won 27 drag races in a row with this car. NHRA took it to Hawaii on July the 4th, 1957, and he won his class and he won his eliminator bracket. Plus he was in a car show there. And I've got some movie film where it shows that it has like probably Von Dutch striping on the dash. Then he ventured onto El Mirage. He set a record with this in October of '57. And I've got the original dash plaque that he was given for setting that record. And he continued to race it just about every weekend. There was one race that's really interesting. He won Lions on Saturday night in San Gabriel's on Sunday afternoon and got a trophy for that. It's supposed to be the first annual. I've never seen another first annual or second annual of that, but you just had to win those two races in a row. There's pictures of it in Hot Rod and Rod and Custom in '57. More recent, there's pictures of it in Hot Rod Deluxe, and right before Rod and Custom went out of business, they had more photographs in there. This is within the last 5 years. But he traded in for another car. By the way, when he got this car, he went to Harry Mann, which is a large Corvette dealer, and showed it to him. They said, we didn't have access to one of those, even though in the car magazines they said they were going to have it, but that would just help with the legalization. He then took it to back to Grotewald, and I think maybe during that time he'd lost his driver's license and made it out of the state pretty fast. Went back and bought a '58 Biscayne from Grotewald that had a 4-speed in it, and just about every '58 expert will tell you they never produced '58s with 4 speeds, but this was a factory car, 315 horse, big block, 348. Now where we go from here?
Well, speaking of the 4-speed car, I have a friend that stopped in to see a couple cars that were parked outside. One was a '58 station wagon with a 4-speed.
Mm-hmm.
Because the lady was driving it, they wanted to pull a trailer, and they were dissatisfied with a 3-speed trying to pull a trailer, so they did have a 4-speed. We tried to get that car, but
But chances are the dealer put it in, or do you think?
they ordered it straight from the factory that way because they were going to pull
Yeah.
a trailer.
You know, whenever the experts tell you something didn't happen, it very well could have.
It very well could have.
And by early '58, this one did have a 4-speed and a 283 fuel-injected engine in it, because he obviously raced the car a lot. And
So he raced it mostly with a fuel injection?
I don't think he raced it too much with a fuel injection, but when Mike Hunt found this car in central Illinois, that motor was still in it.
The original block was in it?
No, the CS motor, the '58 fuel-injected motor was in it. I've just seen notes on it. It did not come when I got it because the car had gone through.
Was the original motor blown at least once?
Probably wore out.
Wore.
I think the top speeds would start coming down on the deal, and 58, 290 horse had more horsepower than a 56 245. I might point out that this car would be one of the very first to receive the Duntov cam on the assembly line. There were at least 2 I've heard of produced before these 6 cars were, but this did have the Duntov cam in it, the 240 horse. I think some of the passenger car guys call them 245 horses, but they had the Duntov cam in them.
Talk a little bit about the desire to have it top-flighted rather than have it American Heritage with NCRS.
My reason for wanting to have it top-flighted rather than American Heritage, because American Heritage had been offered to me, but I wanted to have it top-flighted. And the reason for it was just point out the significance of this car, because this is essentially the first series of cars that came from Chevrolet that were produced at St. Louis that really had true race options. And very much when you take a look at the Z06, ZR1s, so on, this is the granddaddy, great granddaddy, how many greats you want to put in there for it.
Yeah,
So
like-
this is the first effort to get a true race car to the public.
And it was actually, I think the big hang-up of NCRS at the time was that they felt it wasn't done on the production line, but it was done at Chevrolet Racing. And then once you got the documentation that showed it was actually done on the production line, or basically at the factory, then it became eligible for the.
Well, it got closer and closer to that at that time, and I want to say one of the key documents that tipped it over was that when they produced the SR2s at, I believe at Warren, Michigan, I could be wrong on location, but I think it's Warren, Michigan, that the work orders were to send the parts to produce the chassis from St. Louis factory, which showed that
Right,
there
St.
were-
Louis car, not a factory car.
Yes.
It
it helped show it. I mean, we even have a work order where they paid one guy to oversee the production of the first one in St. Louis out of the engineering department, and the total expense for the week, few days, was $140. So it shows that prices have gone up since.
A little bit. I had a question.
What did we miss that was?
I had a
On the
question that was
tick.
floating to my mind and just kind of floated away. Do you have any speculation when they're actually doing these on a production line that somebody from racing, quote unquote, was down there assisting them?
No, just one person from engineering went down to help oversee the production of the first one, because it required various changes to the body itself, obviously different changes of suspension, nothing that Chevrolet couldn't do, but still specialized parts, not the quote normal production car coming down the lines. And maybe the guy just wanted to take a vacation to St. Louis, so.
I think it'd be good to talk about the work orders and just how work orders flowed. I know Ken's talked to me about it a little bit, but essentially engineering figured out what they wanted to do, drew up plans, and then sent the work orders down to the plant. Is that the way they normally work?
I would say yes, but they would help acquire the parts and everything, have them built in-house or elsewhere. But I would say some of the fiberglass parts were probably done in the experimental styling department, because they could produce like the side scoops, which they had also produced for Sebring. And there were things on here. I would say a lot of it was done at various GM divisions. Also on those work orders, sometimes the work's already been done when they make out the paperwork.
Yeah, imagine so. How did you acquire the work order documentation for this car?
Now, back then it was filtered through various sources. Various people had a few documents. It was filtered through various sources that had worked for engineering or had access to. Now, I believe you can go to the Heritage Museum. I've invited
Yeah, you need
to it I've got several cars that they've got documents there. I really need to maybe acquire a copy of the first copy, so to speak, instead
I'll
of.
meet you there.
It's on my bucket list to do, and one of these days I'll do it. Hopefully.
No. So, There was speculation some time ago, I think we talked about this earlier, on the Hawaii trip. There was people on the Corvette forum, I think, back when we were first talking about this car, that thought one of these cars was in Hawaii. And maybe what they're actually seeing was this car, shipped over there to be raced and then shipped back to the States, rather than one of the 6 actually going to Hawaii.
Everything's possible on that. Everything is possible, because if they were around for about a week in 1957, because I got video of this car going around the island to the various sites that you see along the coast around the islands. Plus, it was in the armory for a car show at one time. Drag racing and car shows were more entwined than what they are now.
Are these VHS or?
They probably came over first 8mm, then I put it on VHS, and I think it's faded out through the years. And I think I tried to make a second pass. I got some of the 8mm tapes from Bruce Geisler, and I don't even know if I got the same tapes I had the first time, because it was intermingled. He had a strong network of friends, and they were doing things together. So I think some of it was Bruce took, the other guy took, and so on.
So you actually acquired the car when?
I acquired the car in 1994 from Frank Buck. Frank was getting ready to, he was kind of liquidating his Corvettes. When I went up there, he had 2 race cars that you could buy very reasonable, and had 3 airbox cars still left. And I think he'd restored 5 airbox cars altogether, but he had 3 there. At that time, could probably buy them for $150 a piece.
Wow.
And the price reached probably $1 million, over $1 million. I think there's some sales even over $1 million within the last 5 years, but now the price seems to be more like $700,000 for a top-of-the-line airbox car.
We had, you and I know a very good friend that had one of these and didn't realize what it was, Bill Herring. That car went to Blakely and then went to
Larry Martin.
Larry Martin. Larry Martin did the restoration on that car, right?
It was done at the same time that this one was restored.
By the same people or different?
Yes.
Oh, who
It was done by Dick Robinson
Dick?
and Jimmy Keegan.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize they'd been done the same time.
Yeah, they were essentially done together. And that was, I'm trying to think whether it was done after my Sebring car, but it was somewhat a learning process. But Dick had done so many airbox cars before that it wasn't a real challenge, because these cars were very much complete. They both had later motors
Right.
in them, but to be expected based on the usage of them.
Let's talk about the chicken coop story on this car. I don't think we talked about that.
That's how this car came out of existence. When Bruce traded it in for the 58, it went to probably a student at a college in Fairfield, Iowa. He had a brief period of time, and then it went to 2 owners in Chicago. So it's all some Chicago winters and shows the evidence of it underneath. But then it wound up probably just sitting in a barn. And Mike Hunt, who was the real early 56, 57 researcher for NCRS and later, I think, for vet views on his own, but just had the love for them and grew up with them and everything and had some. He found it in a barn, north central Illinois, and he wrote an article for the Restorer magazine, and he called it the chicken coop. And it was a play on words, coop meaning a series of cars, which just wasn't a coop, but he just thought that sounded good. There was no chickens in there, but there was plenty of dirt and dust and everything.
Okay.
And this was around 76, 77, so it was early on in the restoration hobby.
But did he know what it was when he got it?
No, but I think as time went on, he found it because I've got probably every note he has, and the guy was a neat guy. I got letters after letters between us and what have you, and he had a sense of humor that was unique. He'd have a picture that kind of applied to cars with every letter, and just a neat guy. And if you like 56, 57 Corvettes, he did a lot.
He's a man.
Did a lot for the hobby. And but anyway, at that time, and do you remember what your Sebring Bill came up with his car?
He was driving through Neas City in Florida and saw a Corvette with strange looking things on it, i.e. hood scoops and Halloran, and bought it. He didn't know what about it. He didn't know anything about it. Now he brought it to NCRS to show people, and nobody at that time, that was in 86, 87, 88, something like that.
That recent?
Yeah, and nobody would tell him anything about it. Now, Mike Hunt thought the car, wanted to buy it, but he never told him about it. Bill still a little bit miffed about that. So finally, the car that Bill has now, the 57 that Webster Brenner had, came up for sale because Webster had died. And he couldn't own both of them. So he sold the white car to Blakely for enough to cover buying the 57 from Webster Brenner's estate. A week later, I think, a week or a month later, he was at a car show talking to a guy in Sarasota. And the guy came over to see his 57 and started talking about cars he owned. And he said he owned a 57 SR1. And Bill's ears perked up. What do you mean? He said, yeah. He said I bought it through Dome. Okay. I raced it up in the Wisconsin area, I think it was, for years and years and years. And then I sold it. And I don't know if he sold it in Florida or ended up in Florida. And that car was the car he originally owned. And from there, and that pieces of information, that's where I think you got some information about SR1s, and finally came to light what these cars were. And he still regrets selling that car before he found out what it was. But it was just like a lot of stuff in our habit. It just happenstance. I was talking to this guy, and we talked about this, and this came up. And that's how he found out what these cars were and how to find out the documentation on them. The fact that there were 6 of them. Apparently this guy used to run a 54 or 55, and they called him and said, hey, you might want to come down and look at one of these cars. We just got these in. And he drove up there and bought it on the spot, traded in these other cars, raced it up in Wisconsin area, I think it's Wisconsin.
There's a picture of that car in the 3rd issue of Corvette News.
Right.
On a SECA road rally in, I believe, Wisconsin.
Right. And like I said,
I think I remember the first time Bill had that car at NCRS me, because it was at the Winter Haven, Florida, the Cypress meet, and he had it parked next to the dumpster. And people were looking at it, and just like this car, well, it's not a Sebring car because the serial number's too late. Sebring was in March. These cars were produced in early June. So it wasn't a Sebring car, but what is it?
right.
Even when Frank bought it, they called it, had kind of a derogatory term for it. They called it the clone car. It took me about 5 years to convince them this is not a clone car. And by that time we were getting more paperwork, and I had contact with Bruce Geisler and so on. But it took me a while to just get Dick Robson stop calling it a clone car. It's a SR1.
probably, no one Chevrolet, that's probably what they referred to it as, because it was a quote clone of the racing car, but in essence it was the production car that the racing car contributed parts and
It
stuff.
could be, but any of their official documents, I believe, call it like an SR1
They do?
competition type
Oh.
Corvette. They gave it a long name, and
Okay.
it's on one of the documents where it said we're going to produce these 6 cars, and we're going to produce them with radials and heaters, have all these racing options on it, but yet trying to figure out whether they're building a race car or a production car, but they did have a substantial amount of race options.
What do you
Very
say?
substantial amount of race
11
options.
of 13, right?
Yeah.
Well, I just know from my prototype of 01, when it was produced, the word 01 hadn't been officiated as an RPO, and they're all the build sheets say King of the Hill. Even though when it finally went into production, they never recurred to it that much. When they were building the 50 that, like the one I had.
My ZR1, it's an early 90 model, actually has KOH
It does have it
on
on?
the spare.
On the spare. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Mine actually is written on the build sheet
Yeah.
that they had done. And I want to do a thing on that. What's the most prestigious award this thing has won in this condition?
Well, it's got the Bloomington Gold. It's got the NCRS Top Flight. And they've asked me to go further with it, but I've got several Duntop awards, and I've got other cars that I'm on.
Yeah, you have other projects.
Other projects.
So this was an Amelia Island in,
Oh, it won a award at Amelia Island.
I was going to say, hey, that's a pretty prestigious.
It
award.
is, it is. Old age, memory goes,
Oh, my
but
Lord.
that was a hoot also.
Yeah, I imagine it was. Anything else you'd like to say about the car?
Well, we took it on the California Melee in 2002. Rich and Char Mason, good friends of ours, took the Harley Earl SR2, and we took this, and we did the California Melee, which is only supposed to be 1,000 miles, but it turned out to be about 1,250 miles. And going away speakers was Willie Brown and Mario Andretti. Mario furnished the wines for the week because he has a winery out there. And all I can say about Willie Brown is he is a true car enthusiast, and he wears more expensive suits than Mario does.
Well, tell me about the impromptu car show that developed along that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, the internet started getting hot, particularly when we stayed one night at Mount Shasta, and Harley Earl's niece was mayor of Mount Shasta at that time, and so Rich and Char got together with her and had dinner and talked quite a bit about her rich uncle and so on. Since this was essentially probably his idea, that SR2 was. But I know coming out of the Mount Shasta area towards Sacramento, the internet started getting hot. People would say, well, we saw these kit cars. It must have been a kit car convention coming down the road. Well, we had Ferraris that would sell for 10, 20, well in excess of 10, probably 20 million at this time on it. D-Jag number 3. Bob Bondurant was driving a noted racing Porsche of the 50s. The list just goes on and on about the important cars that were on this. And that night we stayed in, I want to say, either in the Napa Valley or Sonoma Valley. That was our last night. And it continued on. People were taking pictures of them outside the hotels. And you know, maybe these aren't kit cars. And I think that was the final conclusion that
I bet some of the people that see this video say, oh yeah, that's it. I'll take pictures of that.
absolutely,
Post them up.
absolutely. Maybe that guy that you talked about that saw one in Hawaii will come out of the woodwork and he said, yeah, I remember a red one.
That was red in Hawaii
Yeah, it was
Okay.
probably a Cadillac red when
Okay.
it was in the way.
Which would confuse the heck out of everybody, really.
When this car was picked up at Doane, there was 4 of the SR1s there, and the color combination was red, white, blue, and Aztec copper. And the guy that was going to buy the car from Grotwald, Dwayne Grotwald, wanted the red one, and it was promised to somebody else. And so he wound up with Aztec copper car, but then he paid off almost immediately. One comical deal, Dwayne was talking about it. These were farming communities, and the locals were starting to kid the owner of this car about, boy, you got a cheap one that didn't even have hubcaps on it.
Right. Okay.
But that guy, according to Dwayne, bought 2 Corvettes a year.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why the change or what have you, but he sold a lot of Corvettes for a small farming
Bert,
town.
Since you know who the CLA dealer that sold it, were you able to trace where the other cars went by name or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, Bill's the only one that I've seen that really show up as documented.
Okay.
And I have found almost no evidence. I really thought there was one car that had been cut up and used for racing. Might have been, but I never did really hand it. High probability it was one, but I tried to follow up, but you know, the guy just sold it or something like that, and should have spent the time to try to document that one, but I didn't.
This one is a fantastic car. All right, sir. I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you too. It might.
Hey, how about
Well, it's got the Bloomington Gold. It's got the NCRS Top Flight. And they've asked me to go further with it, but I've got several Duntop awards, and I've got other cars that I'm
Yeah, you have other projects.
other projects.
So this was an Amelia Island in,
Oh, it won a award at Amelia Island.
I was gonna say, hey, that's a pretty prestigious.
It
award.
is. It is. Old age, memory goes,
Oh, my
but
Lord,
that was a hoot also.
yeah, I imagine it was. Anything else you'd like to say about the car?
Well, we took it on the California Melee in 2002. Rich and Char Mason, good friends of ours, took the Harley Earl SR2, and we took this, and we did the California Melee, which is only supposed to be 1,000 miles, but it turned out to be about 1,250 miles. And going away speakers was Willie Brown and Mario Andretti. Mario furnished the wines for the week because he has a winery out there. And all I can say about Willie Brown is he is a true car enthusiast, and he wears more expensive suits than Mario does.
Well, tell me about the impromptu car show that developed along that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, the internet started getting hot, particularly when we stayed one night at Mount Shasta, and Harley Earl's niece was mayor of Mount Shasta at that time, and so Rich and Char got together with her and had dinner and talked quite a bit about her rich uncle and so on. Since this was essentially probably his idea, that SR2 was. But I know coming out of the Mount Shasta area towards Sacramento, the internet started getting hot. People would say, well, we saw these kit cars. It must have been a kit car convention coming down the road. Well, we had Ferraris that would sell for 10, 20, well in excess of 10, probably 20 million at this time on it. D-Jag number 3. Bob Bondurant was driving a noted racing Porsche of the 50s. The list just goes on and on about the important cars that were on this. And that night we stayed in, I want to say, either in the Napa Valley or Sonoma Valley. That was our last night. And it continued on. People were taking pictures of them outside the hotels. And you know, maybe these aren't kit cars. And I think that was the final conclusion that
I bet some of the people that see this video say, oh yeah, that's it. I'll take pictures of that.
Absolutely.
Post them up.
Absolutely. Maybe that guy that you talked about saw one in Hawaii will come out of the woodwork and he said, yeah, I remember a red one.
That was red in Hawaii then?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
Probably a Cadillac red.
Okay.
When it was in Hawaii.
Which would confuse the heck out of everybody, really.
When this car was picked up at Doane, there was 4 of the SR1s there, and the color combination was red, white, blue, and Aztec copper. And the guy that was going to buy the car from Grotwald, Dwayne Grotwald, wanted the red one, and it was promised to somebody else. And so he wound up with Aztec copper car, but then he painted almost immediately. One comical deal, Dwayne was talking about it. These were farming communities, and the locals were starting to kid the owner of this car about, boy, you got a cheap one that didn't even have hubcaps on it.
Right. Hubcap. Oh.
But that guy, according to Dwayne, bought 2 Corvettes a year.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why the change or what have you, but he sold a lot of Corvettes for a small farming town.
Since you know who the CLA dealers that sold it, were you able to trace where the other cars went by name or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, Bill's the only one that I've seen that really show up as documented.
Okay.
And I have found almost no evidence. I really thought there was one car that had been cut up and used for racing. Might have been, but I never did really, and it, high probability it was one, but I tried to follow up, but, you know, the guy just sold it or something like that, and should have spent the time to try to document that one, but I didn't.
This one is a fantastic car. All right, sir, I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you too.